Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit Number 1 Rulebook. Introduction. Welcome to the exciting world of Advanced Squad Leader. ASL is a detailed wargaming system that can simulate any company-level ground action from any theater of World War II. The playing pieces represent squads, half-squads, leaders, crews, guns, and vehicles from every major and minor combatant of World War II. The battlefields are represented by geomorphic map boards upon which the counters are maneuvered. Starter kits provide the new player with an easy method for becoming familiar with the basics of the ASL system, using entry-level scenarios, counters, boards, and rules. Squad counters represent approximately 9 to 15 men, depending upon nationality and type. Individual leader counters represent combat leaders historically present at the battle, and also help represent the overall combat independence of the unit to which they are attached. Each squad and each leader is given a morale level on its counter. The higher the morale level, the better it can stand up in combat, and the quicker it can recover from setbacks. Support weapon counters represent individual weapons beyond the organic small arms that are already included in the firepower values given each squad and half-squad counter. Fire groups for attacking enemy units are put together from the combined firepower of individual units and weapons. After totaling the firepower of the attack, 2 six-sided dice are rolled, and that result, modified by various factors, is cross-referenced with the applicable firepower column of the infantry fire table to determine the result of the attack. Results range from no effect to causing the enemy to check its morale level to see if it breaks, to outright elimination of one or more enemy units. Units also use their firepower in close combat, usually in an all-or-nothing fight to the death. Each ASL starter kit scenario simulates a historical battle by providing both the attacker and the defender with an order of battle containing specific units and weapons with which to maneuver in an effort to achieve specified victory conditions. The geomorphic boards can be arranged in numerous different combinations to represent the varied battlefields of Europe. ASL Starter Kit Number 1 is a complete game that introduces the player to the ASL infantry rules and includes squads, half-squads, leaders, support weapons, and simplified rules and terrain to use with them. The counters and boards are all fully compatible with other ASL products. Starter Kit Number 1 contains all the counters needed to play the 6 included scenarios under average circumstances. ASL Starter Kit is a game of wide possibilities, however, and exceptional circumstances in a given playing may result in a shortage of a particular counter, in which case players will need to pool their counters or make do with what they have. ASL Starter Kit Number 1 has been very successful over the years and has spawned the popular follow-on games ASL Starter Kit Number 2, introducing Ordnance, ASL Starter Kit Number 3, introducing tanks, and Decision at Elst, a campaign game on a historical map sheet. These games, led by ASL Starter Kit Number 1, have helped introduce numerous players to the exciting, wide-ranging world of ASL. Not all of these games are always in print, but it is rare when none of them are available. This 10th anniversary edition includes the various rules clarifications that we have found over the years. Additional ASL Starter Kit scenarios, other ASL material, and information on other games are available from Multiman Publishing. Table of Contents. Game Components. Definitions. Sequence of Play. Support weapons, ELR, experience level rating, and unit distinctions, and then into game components. Game components. Map board. This ASL Starter Kit module contains two geomorphic map boards Y and Z. These represent the battlefield and can be butted end-to-end or side-to-side together with others to form different playing areas. Superimposed over the map is a hex grid used to measure distance. Each hex contains a specific type of terrain. Different types of terrain have different effects on movement and combat. Each hex also contains its own grid coordinate that indicates its location on the map, for example, hex K2. Listing the map board in front of the coordinate, for example, YK2, provides a unique identifier for any hex in the system. Each hex contains a white dot that marks the center of the hex. This is used in determining line of sight. Half hexes along the board edge are the equivalent of hexes, although the grid coordinate and white center dot may be missing. And you can see an example like that there. Terrain types. The following describes the various types of terrain found on the boards included in this module. For aesthetic purposes, terrain symbology may extend marginally out of a hex into an adjacent hex of another terrain type. But most hexes are dominated by one specific terrain type and are governed by the rules for that specific terrain type. Usually, the dominant terrain type includes the hex center dot, but occasionally, non-open ground hexes have a hex center dot in open ground. Some terrain is harder to move through than other terrain. Movement costs are expressed in movement factors, MF. Terrain can also block or hinder line of sight, LOS, and can provide some cover by modifying fire attacks with its terrain effects modifier, TEM. Open ground. Open ground is any hex devoid of other printed terrain features, generally covered uniformly in light green, such as hex YFF1. Open ground presents no obstruction or hindrance to line of sight, and the only terrain effects modifier for open ground is the -1 first fire movement in open ground, FFMO, dice roll modifier, DRM, versus moving infantry. Open ground costs infantry 1 movement factor to enter. Buildings. Buildings represent man-made dwellings of various sizes. Any hex that contains a gray or brown rectangular overhead building depiction is a building, such as YP6. A building depiction is an obstacle to line of sight and costs infantry 2 movement factors to enter. The terrain effects modifier for a stone gray building is +3, and for a wooden building, brown, is +2. If the line of sight between two units crosses the building depiction, then the building hex is an obstacle to both units. Okay, so it seems like a +3 makes it harder to hit something. And then in the open ground, there was a -1, which I guess makes it easier to hit units. Roads. Roads represent either paved or dirt surfaces. A road represented by a brown stripe, such as YL5, is a dirt road, while one represented by a gray stripe, such as ZQ4, is a paved surface. A road is considered open ground for all purposes. Additionally, infantry that crosses only road hex sides throughout its entire movement phase, I'm guessing that's what that MPH stands for, is entitled to 1 extra movement factor, the road bonus, unless it claims the protective benefits of a woods road hex, or has to pay the extra movement costs for entering smoke. Okay. Woods. Woods represent a forested area with a with dense undergrowth, such as YG6. Woods depictions are an obstacle to line of sight and cost infantry 2 movement factors to enter. The terrain effects modifier for woods is +1. If the line of sight between 2 units crosses the woods depiction, then the woods hex is an obstacle to both units. Woods Road. A moving unit in a woods road hex such as YE4 is not eligible for the +1 woods terrain effects modifier during defensive first fire, and is subject to FFMO. What was that again? FFMO. First fire movement in open ground. First fire movement or interdiction if the line of sight does not cross a green wood symbol and the moving unit entered the hex at the road movement rate. Okay. Otherwise, normal woods terrain effects modifier is in effect. An infantry unit may always choose to use the woods movement rate and receive resultant terrain effects modifier benefits. The road portion does not block line of sight. Okay, got it. So basically they're saying you can choose whether you want to treat this as like a road hex or a woods hex. At the moment that you enter, you say how much you're going to pay. You're going to say, I'm going to pay the road movement price, and then you're subject to that open ground danger. Or you can say, oh, well, I'm going to move through the woods, and then I don't think you're subject to that. Yeah, you get this benefit. Orchards. An orchard represents a thinly wooded area devoid of undergrowth, such as YK5. An orchard hex, including hex sides, is a hindrance to line of sight, and therefore adds a +1 hindrance DRM for every orchard hex between the target and the firer. Orchards cost infantry 1 movement factor to enter. There is no terrain effects modifier for orchard, but because it is not open ground, it negates FFMO, first fire movement in open ground, and interdiction. Don't think I've learned about interdiction yet. Okay, so this is interesting. So basically, it's not cover, but it's just it makes it harder to see. Got it. And they have this idea of hindrance. I've seen that discussed in Combat Commander, but I don't think this manual has talked about it yet. Grain. While in season, grain represents a cultivated field of a variety of standing crops, such as YU9. A grain depiction is a hindrance to line of sight, and therefore adds a +1 hindrance DRM for every grain hex between the target and the firer, in which the line of sight crosses the grain depiction. It's interesting, it's +1 for every hex, whereas in Combat Commander, you draw a line and you take the largest hindrance, and the largest hindrance adds a single DRM. So that's a different system. Grain is in season during the months of June through September. Outside of this season, grain hexes are treated as open ground instead. Grain costs infantry 1.5 movement factors to enter when in season. There is no terrain effects modifier for grain, meaning it doesn't provide cover, but because it is not open ground unless out of season, it negates first fire movement in open ground, FFMO, and interdiction. Okay. Counters. There are three types of counters used in this game: informational markers, personnel markers, and support weapons, SW. The informational markers are used by both sides and are generally memory devices. These include such counters as prep fire, first fire, pin, and desperation morale. Okay, so that's what DM stands for. These will be described during the discussion of the sequence of play. Personnel counters come in two main types: single-man counters and multi-man counters. Single-man counters, SMC. Single-man counters, or leaders, are elite units, which bear a single silhouette and represent just one man. Leaders have a 2-number strength factor, which consists of the leader's morale on the bottom and his leadership DRM on the top. So if we look up here, his morale is on the bottom, and his leadership DRM is on top. Good order side, broken side. Box, okay, we'll get to that. The latter, his leadership DRM, on the top, this one, is expressed as a negative number or a 0, or occasionally a +1. An unbroken, unpinned leader may use his leadership DRM to affect the performance of other personnel in his location, unless they are moving separately. Okay, so this is a -2. It looks like it's a 9-2, but it's a 9 and a -2. That's honestly, that's confusing how they have that formatted. Okay, so he can affect the performance of other personnel in his location unless they are moving separately. I'm not sure what that means. Leadership modifiers are not cumulative. So that means if you have, I guess, more than one leader, you can't, like, stack them. A leader may attempt only one action per phase, but may use his leadership modifier, even if 0 or +1, more than once in the same phase only, to attempt to rally more than one unit in a RPH. What's that? Rally phase, I guess? Let's look it up. RPH, rally phase, yes. To direct ROF. What's ROF? ROF is rate of fire. A machine gun may be able to attack more than once in a turn. The rate of fire number is encased in a square. Okay, I guess we'll learn what that is. And or defensive fire attacks. And to assist units with morale checks. Okay. So I guess that's like if you have a machine gun, I guess maybe you're going to like roll to see if the machine gun gets to shoot more than once or something. Okay. Multi-man counters, MMC. Multi-man counters are units that bear the silhouette of more than one man, and we see that here. There are two types of multi-man counters used in this game: squad and half squad, HS. A squad bears the silhouette of 3 men. There we go, 3 guys. A half squad, that of 2 men. And I don't think they have an example there. Yeah. Each are defined as either E, elite, 1, first line, 2, second line, G, green, or C, conscript. And so that's the number, the thing in the top right. Class, E, 1, 2, C, or G. Which is noted in the upper right-hand corner of the counter. 2 half squads equal 1 squad in size. Okay. Each multi-man counter contains a 3-digit number called its strength factor that quantifies its capabilities in the game. A 3-digit number. Firepower strength. Okay. Firepower, FP, is the leftmost factor, and represents the firepower the multi-man counter can attack with prior to any modification. The middle number, its normal range, is the number of hexes away that it can reach with its full firepower. Okay, so that's the firepower. That's the normal range. Got it. The third strength factor is its morale, the relative rating of a unit's ability to withstand punishment before breaking. So that's this number. Some squads have a smoke exponent as a superscript to their firepower strength to indicate that they can attempt to place smoke grenades. Okay, so that's the smoke. Got it. A 3-digit number, that is confusing. That is a confusing phrase there. And so this series of 3 numbers is collectively referred to as the strength factor. That is frankly confusing. Broken side. The reverse side of each single-man counter and multi-man counter is its broken side. The large number in the lower right corner is its broken morale level. Okay, so that's the morale. If the broken morale level is encased in a square, that unit is capable of self-rally. Okay, so this one does not have a square, but this one does. And so it says not used, so I guess this is going to be used in some later starter kit where it'll introduce what that's for. Support weapons. These counters represent weapons that must be possessed by multi-man counters or single-man counters to be used. These include machine guns, MG, flamethrowers, FT, and demolition charges, DC. These support weapons, so it's not special weapons, it's support weapons. These support weapons are possessed by the unit stacked immediately beneath them. A support weapon must be possessed to be fired or moved. Support weapons have a portage requirement, portage points or PP, listed on the counter. Support weapons have both a firepower and a range that is used like that of a multi-man counter. Okay? Some support weapons have a multiple rate of fire, shown by a number encased in a square. If the colored die roll in a fire attack die roll is less than or equal to the rate of fire, colored, I guess they mean the red die, because the game came with a red die and a white die. So if that red die roll is less than or equal to the rate of fire factor, that support weapon may fire again in that phase until such time as the rate of fire is exceeded by the colored die roll. Some support weapons, for example the machine gun, may malfunction, in which case they are flipped over to their broken side. The repair number is shown in the upper left corner. The 6 in the lower right corner indicates permanent removal if the original repair die roll is a 6. Yeah, this whole mechanic of like weapons malfunctioning and then having to be repaired, it seems a little bit unnecessary complexity, because I don't think even combat mission doesn't model weapons malfunctioning. So seems a bit unnecessary. But I'm interested to see how it plays out. Okay. And they don't have an example image of a support weapon that I can use. Well, let's see if we can find one here. An example? Nope. Any support weapons? Here we go. So, light machine gun. 1 portage point. What else did it say? Okay. They have a firepower and a range. Okay, so the first number is presumably the firepower, the 2 is the firepower, and the 6 is the range, I would imagine. Just like the multi-man counters. And what else did it say? They have a multiple rate of fire shown by a number encased in a square. Oh, here, this one. Okay, so that's the 1. So that means that if, I guess you're going to roll some die, and if the red number is a 1, if the red die is a 1, you get to roll again. I'm not sure what the B11 means. The repair number is shown in the upper left corner. Okay, so I guess the light machine gun cannot malfunction. Do they have an example of a medium machine gun here? Here we go. Here's a medium machine gun number. No, but maybe you have to like flip it over to see the malfunction side. Yeah. Here we go. Repair. Die roll. Elimination die roll. So you're going to roll a number. I guess you're going to roll one d6. And if you roll a 1, what is it, a 1 or more, it's repaired. If you roll a 6, it is destroyed. Let's see it again. Yeah. That's my guess. Something like that. Okay. Scenario cards. Each game begins with the scenario card, which depicts the information required to play the game. The boards, the units, and where they set up or enter, game length, the victory conditions, the historical setting, and any scenario special rules, SSR, required to play the scenario. Now let me dig out an example of that. Here we go. Here's an example. So this is clearing Colville. So you've got like a picture, victory conditions, historical background. This is the board you need to use and its configuration, like how you orient it. The turns, who sets up first and who moves first, the units, where they set up. And I guess these are the turns that they receive reinforcements on. And then I guess in the setup, it shows you which units appear on which turns. Yeah, these enter on turn 1. These enter on turn 2. And any special rules. And this is just more historical background. Got it. So that is the scenario card. Dice. 1 6-sided white die and 1 6-sided colored die, red in my case. Sometimes a dice roll, DR, of both is required. Sometimes a die roll, lowercase dr, of just 1 is required. The colored die is used for determining rate of fire. Definitions. AFPH, advancing fire phase. Advance phase, area fire. The firepower of an attacking unit is halved for each case of area fire. Assault fire, an attack in the advancing fire phase available to multi-man counters that have underscored firepower factors. Okay, so like this one has an underline. Underline means assault fire. Got it. Assault movement, a type of infantry movement. Attacker, the player whose player turn is currently being played. In other games, they would call this the phasing player. B number, breakdown number of a support weapon. Weapon is repairable. I'm not sure what that means. Casualty reduction, a combat result that eliminates a half squad or wounds a single man counter. A squad is reduced to a half squad. CC, close combat. Close combat phase. center hex dot, the white dot in the middle of the hex from which line of sight is determined. So you can see those here as an example. There's another one. Control. A good order infantry multi-man counter gains control of the hex or building it occupies without the presence of an enemy unit. Control. A good order infantry multi-man counter gains control of the hex or building it occupies without the presence of an enemy unit. This is often required for purposes of victory determination. Not all hexes of a building need to be occupied for a unit to control a building if there are no enemy units in the building at the time a friendly unit enters the building. Okay. Got it. So basically, yeah, as soon as you have a unit that's in good order and it enters a hex and it doesn't have an enemy unit, it has taken control. As opposed to, for example, in Undaunted Normandy, where you have to actually play an action. You have to take an action, an additional action, to take control. It's not automatic when you enter the hex. Cowering. The penalty for multi-man counters rolling doubles on an infantry fire table attack without leader direction. Oh, interesting. CX, counter exhausted. The status of a unit after it declares double time or uses all its movement factors in the advance phase. DC, demolition charges. Defender, the player whose player turn is not presently being played. In other games, they would call that the non-facing player. Defensive first fire, firing at moving units in the movement phase. I'm guessing that's what that stands for. Yes. DFPH, defensive fire phase. Okay. DM, desperation morale, +4 DRM on rally attempts. Okay. Double time. An infantry unit may add 2 movement factors to its movement phase by becoming exhausted, counter-exhausted. Okay. This is kind of similar to, what's the name of the game? The GCACW, Great Campaigns of the American Civil War, where you can move your divisions extra spaces at the cost of causing them to become disorganized. Lowercase dr, die roll, a roll of just 1 die. Capital Dr, dice roll, a roll of 2 dice. Lowercase drm or all caps drm. A die roll or dice roll modifier. A mathematical adjustment, either positive or negative, to the original die roll or dice roll. FFMO, first fire movement in open ground. A -1 DRM versus moving infantry in open ground. Does not apply if there is line of sight hindrance. Okay, so this makes it easier. I think this makes it easier to hit infantry in open ground. FFNAM, first fire non-assault movement. A -1 DRM versus moving infantry provided the target is not using assault movement. FG, fire group. 2 or more units and or machine guns joining together to make a combined fire attack. Got it. FP, firepower. The strength with which a unit or fire group attacks. FPF, final protective fire. FT, flamethrower. Good order. An infantry unit that is neither broken nor marked with a melee counter. Hex grain. Any string of connected hexes in which a straight line of sight drawn between the first and last hex center dots also bisects the hex center dot of every hex between them. Okay. Got it. So that's just like moving across along a diagonal. Okay. Right. So that's, I don't know if I can easily, if I dig out a map. So what that means is like, if you're moving across these hex lanes, as opposed to like if I draw a line between this hex and this hex, Oh, I guess that would also... What about this hex? Okay. If I draw a line between these two hexes, it will pass through hexes without hitting the center dots. But if I do this one, it'll go through every dot. Now, my question would be, if it's going this way, is it... I mean, it's moving along the hex side there. Is that considered hex grain as well? It's not clear to me. Okay. Hex side. One of the 6 lines that combine to form a hex. Each hex side also forms 2 vertices. Got it, those are the points. Hindrance. Some terrain types, orchard, grain, are not substantial enough to completely block line of sight. These are line of sight hindrances, and each one hinders fire traced through, but not into, it, and does not block line of sight completely. Each hindrance hex adds a +1 DRM to any infantry fire table dice roll for fire traced through it. HS, half squad. IFT, infantry fire table. Inexperienced. Green multi-man counters not stacked with a good order leader and conscript multi-man counters suffer inexperienced penalties. 3 movement factors. B number, what was that again? That was breakdown number or X number. I don't think I've seen that one yet. Is that elimination number? Breakdown number of a support weapon. Weapon is not repairable. Okay, not sure what that means. Lowered by 1. Cower 2 columns. +1 ambush DRM. Okay, I'm guessing that'll make sense later as I read the rest of the rules. Infantry, all single-man counters and multi-man counters. Inherent terrain. Certain terrain depictions, orchard, and counters, smoke, designate the entire hex, including the hex sides, as having the characteristics of that hex. A line of sight that enters such a hex, even if just traced along such a hex side, is affected by its inherent terrain. Okay, that's good to know. Interdiction. A NMC, what's NMC? Normal morale check, suffered by a unit that routes without using low crawl through open ground in line of sight of an unpinned enemy unit in normal range if first fire movement in open ground could hypothetically apply. Okay. I'll have to wait and see what that means. IPC, inherent portage capacity. Known enemy unit. Any enemy unit to which the friendly unit in question currently has line of sight. LLMC, leader loss morale check. An additional morale check caused at any time by the loss of a leader with higher morale than the units he is stacked with. LLTC, leader loss task check, caused by the breaking of a leader with a higher morale than the units he is stacked with. LOS, line of sight. Low crawl, a route of 1 hex during the route phase. Avoids interdiction in open ground. Melee, a condition existing between opposing units in the same hex after being attacked in close combat. MF, movement factor, a measure of movement capability for infantry units. Okay. MG, machine gun, a type of support weapon designated as light, LMG, medium, MMG, or heavy, HMG. MMC, multi-man counter, squad or half squad. Movement phase, normal morale check, requires a dice roll less than or equal to the current morale level of the unit to avoid breaking. Leadership modifiers can apply, so that's a 2d6. It's interesting this game doesn't say 2d6, it just says capital DR. Okay. PBF, point blank fire. Fire at a target in an adjacent hex. Total firepower is double the normal firepower. Prep fire phase. Player turn. The 8 consecutive phases that are half of one game turn, and during which the attacker can move his forces. PP, portage points, represent how difficult a support weapon is to carry and are assessed versus a unit's inherent portage capacity. PTC, pin task check. Residual FP, firepower left in a hex as a result of defensive first fire. ROF, rate of fire. A machine gun may be able to attack more than once in a turn. The rate of fire number is encased in a square. Rally phase, route phase. Self-rally. The capability of a unit to rally itself without a good order leader present, as indicated by a broken side morale encased in a square. Right, got it. Smoke exponent. A superscript to a unit's firepower strength, indicating the ability to attempt to place smoke grenades. Squad equivalent. 2 half squads are equivalent in size to 1 squad. What does that mean, size? SSR, Scenario Special Rule. Stacking limits. Each side may have up to 3 multi-man counter squad equivalents per hex, plus up to 4 single-man counters. Okay, so size presumably means for the purpose of stacking limits. Subsequent first fire. Firing again in defensive first fire, but as area fire. Support weapon. Terrain effects modifier. An infantry fire table dice roll modifier caused by the terrain of the unit being attacked. Okay. X number, breakdown number of a support weapon. Weapon is not repairable. Okay. What is, I don't understand the B number. Breakdown number of a support weapon. Is the breakdown number, I'm not sure what the, I have to wait to see what breakdown means. Sequence of play. There are 8 distinct phases in each player turn that are resolved in the following order. Rally phase, prep fire phase, movement phase, defensive fire phase, advancing fire phase, route phase, advance phase, and close combat phase. A full turn is recorded when both players have run through the entire sequence as the attacker. Rally phase. During the rally phase, both players attempt to rally their eligible broken units, fix broken equipment. Okay, so each player has a separate rally phase. Both players attempt. So is it during each player turn's rally phase, both players do this? That's not clear to me. During the rally phase, both players attempt to rally their eligible broken units, fix broken equipment, or transfer equipment to another unit in the same location. Other than leaders rallying themselves and other units, each unit may undertake only one action per rally phase. So the actions can be rallying, fixing broken equipment, or transferring. Okay. These actions must be done in order. Reinforcements. The attacker rolls for any provisional SSR reinforcements. I guess that's Scenario Special Rule. Reinforcements. And sets up off-board all forces due to enter this player turn. Recovery. good order units may attempt to recover an unpossessed support weapon in the same hex by making a die roll less than 6, +1 die roll modifier if CX, what was CX again? CX is counter exhausted. The status of a unit after it declares double time or uses all of its movement factors in the advance phase. Okay. Okay. Attacker first. Oh, so both players can do this during each player's player turn. I think that's what that means. Repair of a broken support weapon. A good order unit possessing a broken support weapon of its own nationality, that is, color, may attempt to repair the support weapon by making a die roll less than or equal to the repair number on the back of the counter. Attacker first. A die roll of 6 eliminates the support weapon permanently. Okay. Transfer of support weapons. Stacks may be freely rearranged to change possession of all support weapons between good order units in the same location. Attacker first. Okay. Self-rallies. Both sides may attempt to self-rally, attacker first, eligible units, those with a box around their broken side morale level, for example, leaders. The attacker only may attempt to self-rally one multi-man counter. A leader attempting to self-rally may not apply his leadership modifier. Okay. And any unit attempting to self-rally also suffers a +1 DR dice roll modifier. Okay. Unit rallies. Both sides, attacker first, may attempt to rally broken units stacked with a good order leader. Right. In order to rally, a unit must make a dice roll less than or equal to the morale number on its broken side. So dice roll means 2 dice. There is a +4 DRM if the unit is suffering from desperation morale, DM. A -1 dice roll modifier if the unit is in woods or buildings, and a dice roll modifier equal to the leadership modifier of the leader attempting to rally the broken unit. Okay? If the only leader present in a stack of broken units is himself broken, he may attempt to rally the other units only if he self-rallies first. There is no penalty for failing a rally attempt unless the unit rolls an original 12, in which case it suffers casualty reduction. No unit may attempt to rally more than once per player turn. However, a good order leader may attempt to rally all the units he is stacked with. Marker removal. All desperation morale, that was what that stood for, right? Yeah. All desperation morale counters are removed at the end of the rally phase unless the desperation morale unit is adjacent to a known enemy unit. A broken unit may opt to keep its desperation morale status unless in woods or building. Okay, why would you keep that? And they have a rally example here. So a broken 527 in hex YQ6 here attempts a multi-man counter self-rally. 527. Okay. So I guess the 527's on the other side of this counter. It must add 1 to its rally attempt for self-rally, but may subtract 1 for being in a building. The original dice roll is a 7, so they rolled 2 dice and they got a 7, with the modifiers negating each other. Okay. Since this is less than or equal to the 527's broken morale level of 7, the 527 rallies and is flipped to its unbroken side. Next, the leader attempts to rally both broken squads. The broken 527 must add 4 to its dice roll because it is currently under a desperation morale marker. The leader's -1 DRM applies, as does the -1 for being in a building. The broken 447 is not under a desperation morale marker and does not have to apply the additional +4 for desperation morale. The total dice roll modifier for the 527 is +2, and for the 447 is -2. The original dice roll, so 2d6, for the 527 is 6. After adding the +2 DRM, the final dice roll is 8. Since this is greater than the 527's broken morale level of 7, the squad does not rally. The original dice roll for the 447 is 9. After adding -2, the final dice roll is 7. Since this is less than or equal to the 447's broken morale level of 7, the 447 rallies and is flipped over to its unbroken side. Prep fire phase and fire attacks. Fire attacks are the main process by which a unit attacks enemy units. No unit may fire at full strength more than once per player turn, except for support weapons maintaining rate of fire. Otherwise, a player may fire all, some, or none of his units in any applicable fire phase. Fire attacks ordinarily affect all infantry units in the target hex, except during the movement phase when a defensive first fire attack only affects units moving together. A unit may only fire at an enemy unit if it has a line of sight to it. This can be determined by stretching a sewing thread taut between the center of the firing hex and the center of the target hex, and cannot apply to off-board units. If the thread does not cross a line of sight obstacle, buildings or woods depictions, with the obstacle visible on both sides of the string, there is a line of sight between the two hexes. The terrain in the firer's hex or target hex does not block line of sight to the center dot. Attacks may be traced through units in intervening hexes without affecting them. Neither player may make a line of sight check until after an attack has been declared. Should a line of sight check reveal that a line of sight obstacle blocks the fire attack is not resolved, but the units that declared the attack are still considered to have fired for all purposes, including possible breakdown. Any combination of smoke or terrain, line of sight, hindrance, dice roll modifiers greater than or equal to +6 blocks that line of sight completely. The firepower of an attacking unit or machine gun is doubled for point-blank fire, which occurs when a unit or machine gun fires at an adjacent hex. A unit or machine gun or flamethrower may attack beyond its normal range as area fire at a distance up to and including double that range, but does so at half firepower. Fractions of halved firepower totals are not dropped, but rather retained and subject to further modification or added to the firepower totals of other units involved in the same attack. Firepower modifications are cumulative. Attackers' firepower can be both doubled and halved, and can be halved again several times. A unit may not split its firepower between different targets, but a squad may opt to fire its own firepower at one target and any possessed support weapon at a different target. Okay. Whenever a non-leader directed multi-man counter attack rolls original doubles as the infantry fire table resolution dice roll, like 2d6, it cowers and is resolved on the next lower column on the infantry fire table, and results in the cowering unit being marked with a prep fire or final fire counter as appropriate. Yeah, this seems like another complication that seems unnecessary. If an inexperienced multi-man counter is involved in such an attack, prep fire, final fire, the attack shifts 2 columns to the left rather than just one. Any shift below the lowest column results in an attack that has no effect. Cowering does not affect close combat. DC, what's DC? CC is close combat, right? Yes. DC is demolition charges or residual firepower attacks. 2 or more units may join together to make a combined fire attack and are termed a fire group. A fire group may consist of units from more than one hex, only if each participating unit occupies a hex in or adjacent to another participating unit of the same fire group. A leader alone cannot be a fire group link. Okay, that's interesting. All members of the fire group must be able to trace a line of sight to the target. A multi-hex fire group that discovers that part of the fire group does not have a line of sight to the target forfeits the participation of that unit. The units in the fire group with valid line of sight must still attack the target, but as a smaller fire group if adjacent, or as separate attacks at the firer's option. If units in the same hex are going to attack the same unit, they must do so as a fire group. They may not make separate attacks unless using a flamethrower or subsequent rate of fire attacks. Okay. A leader may use his leadership dice roll modifier to modify the infantry fire table dice roll of any one attacking unit, except a flamethrower or fire group per player turn, provided all units of the fire group are in the same hex. A leadership dice roll modifier may be applied to a multi-hex fire group only if a leader directing that attack is present in every hex. Okay. In every hex. Only if a leader directing that attack is in every hex. What does that mean? The leadership dice roll modifier in effect in this condition is that of the lowest quality participating leader. A leader directing fire is treated as if he were attacking. What does it mean for a leader to be directing? What does it mean for multiple leaders to be directing in a single fire group attack? That part does not make sense to me. Effects. Fire attacks are resolved by cross-referencing the combined firepower total of the attacking units with a dice roll on the infantry fire table. The attacker uses the rightmost column of the infantry fire table, whose listed firepower does not exceed the total firepower of the attack. Okay. Thus, an attack total of 9 is resolved on the 8 column. Okay, got it. Excess firepower factors have no effect. The dice roll is modified by adding any applicable dice roll modifier, such as leadership, terrain effects modifier, or line of sight hindrance, between, but not in, the firer's hex and the target hex. The results are applied as follows. Number KIA. As many targets as the number indicated are eliminated, randomly determined. All remaining targets are automatically broken and desperation morale or suffer casualty reduction, see below, if already broken. K/number. One unit suffers a casualty reduction, and all other target units, including any just reduced half squads, must take a morale check, adding the indicated number to the morale check dice roll. Which of multiple targets suffers casualty reduction is randomly determined. Casualty reduction eliminates a half squad, reduces a squad to a half squad, and wounds a single man counter. A wounded single man counter must immediately make a wound severity die roll. A 1 to 4 indicates a light wound, place a wound counter, and a 5 to 6 eliminates the single man counter. A wounded single man counter is reduced to 3 movement factors, has an IPC, what was that? Oh, an inherent portage capacity of 0, right? I think that was what it stood for. IPC. Inherent portage capacity of 0, meaning you can't carry anything, and cannot double time. If wounded again, he must add a single +1 die roll modifier to his wound severity die roll, the only penalty for being wounded more than once. His morale level and leadership modifier are reduced by 1. For example, a wounded 8-0 leader has a morale level of 7 and a leadership modifier of +1. Okay, got it. Which is bad, I think. I think you want negative leadership modifiers, not positives. NMC. Each target unit must attempt to pass a normal morale check by making a dice roll less than or equal to the unit's morale level. Okay. The best leader in a hex must check first. Okay. Units that fail are broken and inverted and have a desperation morale counter placed on them. Remove any pin or counter exhausted counters. A unit that rolls an original 12 on a morale check suffers casualty reduction in addition to breaking. An already broken unit that fails a morale check suffers casualty reduction. An already broken unit that rolls an original 12 on a morale check is eliminated. An unbroken unit that fails a morale check by more than its experience level rating, right? That's what ELR stood for, right? ELR is E, A, B, C, D, E, A, B, C, D, and it's not in here. Okay, it's not in the definitions. I think that's what it stood for. Where was I? An unbroken unit that fails a morale check by more than its experience level rating might be replaced by a lesser quality unit. Okay, so I just took a second or a minute to look up what this ELR was, and it's not what I thought it was, which is this thing in the top right corner. That is not the experience level rating. Experience level rating is instead, it's explained later, it's just a number that's given in the scenario, it's like a numeral, an integer, and it's the maximum amount by which an unbroken unit may fail any morale check without being replaced by a lower quality unit. So that's what ELR is. So it is not this number in the top right, or letter in the top right. So, where was I? Here. Unbroken units use the morale level printed on their broken side for all morale checks and rally attempts until they are rallied and return to their normal side. Okay. Broken units may only rout an attempt to rally. An unpinned good order leader will apply his leadership dice roll modifier to other units, including lower morale leaders, in the target location if he passes his morale check unharmed, but not to himself. Furthermore, if a leader is eliminated, all units with a lower current morale level stacked with him and not in close combat must take a normal morale check after resolving the initial attack, with any negative leadership dice roll modifier added to the dice roll rather than subtracted from it. So that would be bad then. So I think a negative leadership dice roll modifier is normally good. And that would mean that you're going in the other direction. I think that's what that means. This is a leader loss morale check. Using the term added when you have a negative dice roll modifier, that is confusing. Because you're normally, the dice roll modifier is negative, you're normally adding it. You're not subtracting it. If you subtract a negative number, that has the effect of adding a positive number. So that's just confusing, that choice of words. This is a leader loss morale check. If a leader breaks, all good order units with a lower current morale level stacked with him and not in close combat must take a pin task check after resolving the initial attack, with any negative leadership dice roll modifier added to the dice roll rather than subtracted from it. Okay. This is a leader loss task check, LLTC. Okay. If an unbroken unit passes a required morale check by exactly the highest number by which that unit could pass the morale check after all modification, then that unit is considered pinned, and a pin counter is placed on that unit. See PTC below. The highest number by which that unit could pass. Okay, I'll have to see an example to understand what that means. Number MC. The number before the morale check is a positive dice roll modifier that must be applied to the morale check dice roll. Pin task check. Each unbroken and unpinned target unit must roll less than or equal to its current morale level or be pinned. Leadership dice roll modifier may apply if the leader that is part of the target group first passes his own pin task check. Okay. Units that fail their pin task check have a pin counter placed on them. During that turn, they may not move, their firepower is halved, rate of fire is lost, and a pinned leader may not use his leadership dice roll modifier. Units cannot be pinned more than once per player turn. A broken unit, not under desperation morale, that becomes adjacent to a known enemy unit or is attacked by enough firepower, taking the possibility of cowering into account, to possibly inflict a normal morale check, is placed under desperation morale. A broken unit not under desperation morale becomes to possibly inflict a normal morale check is placed on it. Okay, that's a little bit confusing. Okay, so let's look at these examples here. So first of all, line of sight example. The 467, I guess that's this one, can see the 447A, this one, in YF3, there is F3, because a string drawn from the center dot in I2, this hex, to the dot in F3 does not hit any woods depiction. It goes down the road. And this unit can see F447B, this one, in J5, with a +1 hindrance due to the orchard in J4, this orchard. It cannot see the 447C unit, this one, due to the building in J3. Right, okay, got it. That's pretty easy. Okay, so before I look at this example, I just noticed that I missed one other thing in this prep fire section, which is this brief paragraph here. Prep fire phase. The attacker conducts fire attacks in the prep fire phase. After resolving each attack during the prep fire phase, the firing unit and support weapon is marked with a prep fire marker. Okay? So let's look at this example. Prep fire phase example, assuming a German experience level rating of 3. During the American prep fire phase, one 747 unit in hex YN5, N6 is here, so this would be N5 here, forms a multi-hex fire group with the 666 in hex 06. 06 would be this one, I guess. So this is a multi-hex fire group. To fire at the German units in hex P5. So P5 would be this hex here. The total firepower is 19. 6 firepower for the 666 in 06 is doubled for point-blank fire. So that would be 12. Plus 7 firepower from the 747 in N5. Okay, so only one unit in this hex fires, I guess. And the attack occurs on the 16 firepower column of the infantry fire table. Right, that's what that stood for. And it's not in the definitions. Okay, that's fine. The dice roll modifiers include a +3 for the terrain effects modifier of the stone building that I guess the defender's in, although you can't see it, and a +1 for the orchard hindrance, which would be this one. So even if it's along the hex side, that's still considered a hindrance. I remember that. For a total dice roll modifier of +4. The original dice roll is 6. After adding 4, the final dice roll is 10. Cross-referencing 10 on the 16 column of the infantry fire table results in a normal morale check. Thus, each unit in hex P5 undergoes a normal morale check. One 467 unit rolls an original 9, and the other rolls a 7. Neither dice roll is modified. The 467 that rolled a 9 is flipped to his broken side with a desperation morale counter placed on top. Is placed on top. That doesn't seem like the right grammar. Yeah, that's a mistake. The 467 that rolled a 7 has a pin counter placed on top. since it rolled equal to its morale on a morale check. Finally, the American units have a prep fire counter placed on them, which is this white counter. Got it. Next, the remaining American 747 and 9-1 in N5, so that's one of these other ones and the leader, attack the 467 in P1. 467 in P1. P1? Oh, all the way up there. Okay. With 2 firepower. 7 firepower at long range fire is 3.5 firepower. And you use the 2 firepower columns, so you rolled round down. And a +2 DRM. +3 because of it's a stone building, the defender's in a stone building. -1 because of the leadership modifier. The original dice roll is a 2. Snake eyes, double 1s. The attack does not cower because it was directed by a leader. And the final dice roll is a 4. It's a 2 modified with a +2 dice roll modifier. Got it. Cross-referencing 4 on the 2 column of the infantry fire table results in a 1 morale check. The 467 makes an original dice roll of 5, modified to a 6, so the 467 is unaffected because 6 is less than its morale of 7. The American units have a prep fire counter placed on them. Okay. The American player then elects to fire the 536 in hex N4, this one, at hex 05, which would be this one, hex. The total firepower is 10, because it's adjacent, and the attack occurs on the 8 firepower column. The dice roll modifier is +0, as the orchard is a +1 hindrance, but is +0 as a terrain effects modifier. So basically, because the unit is in the same hex as this orchard, it doesn't count as a hindrance, I think. You can't count it as a hindrance. It's only if it's going through that hex or along one of the hex sides that you have that. The original dice roll is a 4, double 2s, so the attack cowers 2 columns since the unit is inexperienced. And the final dice roll is a 4. Cross-referencing a 4 on the 4 firepower column, 2 shifts to the left of the 8 firepower column, results in a 1 morale check. The 467 makes an original dice roll of 12 boxcars, with a final dice roll of 13. The 467 is casualty reduced for rolling an original 12 and replaced with a 247. The 247 is replaced by a 237 half squad, as the final dice roll was greater than the morale of the unit plus that unit's experience level rating, which was 3, I think. Yeah, to find there. So it experiences unit substitution. The 237 is flipped to its broken side and marked with a desperation morale counter. The 536 has a prep fire counter placed on it. So that's pretty involved, but it's not too bad. That's not too bad. But the snake eyes thing seems like it adds unnecessary complexity. Although I guess it makes it more exciting, maybe? I don't know. More chaotic. Movement phase. During the movement phase, the attacker may move all, some, or none of his units, provided they did not fire during the prep fire phase, and are neither broken nor held in melee. Units can be moved in any direction or combination of directions up to the limit of their movement factor allotment. Units may move over and stack on top of any other friendly units, but may not move into a hex containing enemy units during the movement phase. Units enter from off-board, either at the start of a scenario or as reinforcements, as directed by the scenario card, including turn and location of entry. Units are set up off-board along the specified edges of the map at the start of their reinforcement phase in the player turn of entry. They may not perform any action while off-board except move during the movement phase per normal open ground movement costs. They must enter during the movement phase or advancement phase? Let's see. Advance phase? APH. Advance phase, yeah. Where was I? They must enter during the movement phase or advance phase of their turn of entry or be eliminated. Oh wow, that's brutal. Roads are considered to extend off-board for purposes of road bonus. Okay. This is different from the Simonich system where units can stay off map and just enter in a later turn if they need to. Roads are considered to extend off-board for purposes of road bonus. Okay. A unit may not voluntarily leave the map unless it is in good order and exits as part of the victory conditions, doing so as if the off-board hex were open ground. Any unit otherwise forced to exit the map is eliminated. A single man counter has 6 movement factors, or 3 movement factors if wounded, and a multi-man counter has 4 movement factors, or 3 movement factors if inexperienced. A movement factor bonus of 1 can be earned if the unit travels along a road throughout the movement phase. Any multi-man counter that begins and ends its movement phase stacked with a leader receives a 2 movement factor bonus during the movement phase, provided it moves with the leader in a combined stack. Movement factors cannot be transferred between units, nor accumulated between turns. Units expend movement factors based on the terrain that is entered, subtracting that amount from their remaining total until they reach 0 or choose not to move further. Whenever a player moves a unit, he states the movement factors expended by that unit in entering each hex or in performing any other activity in that hex. If a unit is going to end its movement phase there, he must state so before moving another unit. The player is not allowed to take the unit back to a previously occupied hex and begin again unless it does so as part of its movement. Once a unit moves, stops, and another unit moves, the original unit may not move again in that movement phase. For each side, up to 3 multi-man counter squad equivalents and 4 single-man counters may be in a hex at a time. Okay? So that's 40 meters, 3 squads, so that's like a platoon in 40 meters. Okay. Units are usually moved one at a time unless a multi-man counter is using bonus movement factors gained by moving with a leader. Units may choose to move as a stack and may break up the stack during the movement phase to continue to move separately. But all members of that moving stack, must end their movement phase before a unit not in that stack may move. A unit that moves no more than 1 hex during the movement phase may use assault movement if the player declares that he is using assault movement, and the move does not take all of the unit's movement factors. Assault movement reduces the unit's vulnerability to defensive first fire by avoiding the first fire... What is it? First FFNAM. What was that one again? FF. First fire non-assault movement. Let's just look at here. A -1 DRM, which is bad for the mover, versus moving infantry provided the target is not using assault movement. First fire non-assault movement. Okay. Sure. Any infantry capable of movement. So basically, this sounds like what you're doing in this situation is you're like having your men move carefully through cover instead of just like, walking or jogging. Any infantry capable of movement and neither broken, pinned, wounded, using assault movement, nor counter-exhausted may double time if the player announces the option at the beginning of that unit's movement phase and places a counter-exhausted counter on it. Double time increases the unit's movement factors by 2. Counter-exhausted units must add 1 to any attack dice roll or any die roll, maximum +1, they make, or direct, including infantry fire table and close combat attacks, and recovery, ambush, and smoke grenade checks. A counter-exhausted unit has its inherent portage capacity reduced by 1, and any unit making a close combat attack against a counter-exhausted unit has its close counter dice roll reduced by 1, which is, I think, good for the attacker. A counter-exhausted counter is removed at the start of the unit's next movement phase and does not affect that unit during that movement phase other than prohibiting its use of double time during that movement phase. Okay. A unit with a smoke exponent may check for smoke grenade placement during the movement phase by declaring so, expending 1 movement factor to place smoke in its own hex, or 2 movement factors to place smoke in an adjacent hex, and making a die roll less than or equal to its smoke exponent number. A counter-exhausted unit must add a +1 die roll modifier. No unit may attempt to place smoke grenades more than once per movement phase. If the smoke placement die roll is a 6, the unit must immediately end its movement phase in its current location. Why? Why do they have these random, awful effects like that? Smoke represents an inherent line-of-sight hindrance. Any fire traced into or through a smoke hex is subject to an additional +2 hindrance dice roll modifier per hex, +3 if firing out of a smoke hex. Any movement into, but not out of, smoke costs 1 additional movement factor. A smoke grenade counter is removed at the end of the movement phase. Interesting. A moving unit may attempt to recover an unpossessed support weapon in the same hex by expending 1 movement factor and making a die roll less than 6, with a +1 DRM if the counter is exhausted. 1 attempt per unit per support weapon. Okay, so it sounds like it's basically guaranteed. You're rolling a single die, it needs to be less than a 6. So the only way you're going to fail that is if you got the counter-exhausted status. Defensive first fire. Defensive fire can occur during the enemy movement phase and the defensive fire phase. The portion occurring during the enemy movement phase is called defensive first fire and can be used only versus a moving unit. Defensive first fire attacks affect only the moving units, regardless of other units that occupy the same hex at the instant of attack. Anytime a unit or stack expends movement factors in the line of sight of a good order defender unit The defender has the option to temporarily halt movement while he fires at it in that location with as many attacks as he can bring to bear. The defender must place a first fire counter on top of any unit or support weapon that has fired and exhausted its rate of fire. Defensive first fire must be resolved before the moving unit or stack leaves the intended target hex or expends another movement factor. The defender may not request that a moving unit or stack be returned to a previous position to undergo attack. However, the attacker must give the defender ample opportunity to declare his fire before moving on, and must declare the end of that unit's movement before moving another unit. Once another unit begins movement, or the movement phase is declared over, previously moved units are no longer subject to defensive first fire attacks. Any action that requires a unit to expend a movement factor in a hex qualifies the unit as a target for defensive first fire, even though the unit might not have entered that hex during the movement phase. Examples of such expenditures include smoke grenade attempts, support weapon recovery, and demolition charge placement. Defensive first fire attacks are resolved in the same manner as other fire attacks. Defensive first fire attacks can also benefit from a -1 first fire non-assault movement DRM against infantry moving without using assault movement, and a -1 first fire movement in open ground DRM if the infantry unit is moving in open ground. Note that the first fire movement in open ground DRM is not applicable to a unit that has a line of sight hindrance in the line of sight between the target and the firer, even if the moving unit is in open ground. Okay, well, does this apply if the unit is just throwing a smoke grenade? That's not clear to me. I guess, maybe expending a movement factor is not always considered movement, something like that. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up. A defender infantry unit already marked with a first fire counter may defensive first fire again with its own firepower and or machine gun during that movement phase, provided that the target is not at a range greater than that to the closest enemy unit in line of sight, nor outside the firer's normal range. A unit thus using subsequent first fire has its firepower halved. After the attack is resolved, flip the first fire counter over to its final fire side for the unit, and all its support weapons, whether or not they all fired. If using a machine gun during subsequent first fire, the B number, what was B number again? B number is breakdown number. The breakdown number is lowered by 2, and the machine gun is permanently removed on an original infantry, I think that's infantry fire table. Infantry fire table, yep. Dice roll greater than or equal to the original breakdown number. Okay. So presumably that means it's more risky. Final protective fire is an option available to a defending unit already marked with a final fire counter which wishes to fire at a unit moving adjacent to it during the movement phase. Final protective fire is treated as subsequent first fire, with the firepower also doubled due to the effects of PBF. What's PBF again? Point blank fire, which is fire at a target in an adjacent hex. Okay. With an additional penalty. Immediately after normally resolving the attack, the original infantry fire table dice roll, modified only by applicable leadership dice roll modifiers, I guess there would only be one, is used as a normal morale check against the units using final protective fire, including any directing leader. Provided it does not break, there is no limit to the number of final protective fire attacks a unit may make, other than the number of moving units and the movement factors they expend moving adjacent to the firer's hex. A unit using final protective fire must use all its firepower and usable machine gun, and may form a fire group with units not using final protective fire, but only those units using final protective fire are affected by its adverse effects. A unit that survives a defensive first fire attack unharmed can be fired upon again in that same location during its movement phase before expending additional movement factors, but only by different attackers, or if it expended at least 2 movement factors in that hex. The same unit or support weapon can never defensive first fire or subsequent first fire or final protective fire on a moving unit in the same location more times than the number of movement factors expended in that location during the movement phase. So that means, like, if you move a guy adjacent, suppose you're attacking and you would move a guy adjacent, I guess that means they can do a final protective fire for that movement into the hex, and then suppose for some reason you want to throw a smoke grenade or demolition charges, they could then do final protective fire again. That's my guess. A unit broken or pinned by defensive first fire can be fired upon again in its current location by other defensive first fire attacks, but is attacked in its broken or pinned state. A moving unit subject to final fire non-assault movement, I think that's what that stands for, FF. First fire non-assault movement, or first fire movement in open ground. Yep. A moving unit subject to first fire non-assault movement or first fire movement in open ground that breaks is still subject to those dice roll modifiers in that location for subsequent attacks until its movement phase ends. A unit that is pinned is not subject to any further first fire normal non-assault movement or first fire movement in open ground while pinned. Okay. However, if subsequent first fire or other defensive first fire against the pin unit breaks that unit, it loses that pin status and is again subject to first fire non-assault movement or first fire movement in open ground dice roll modifiers, if previously applicable, for further defensive first fire attacks against it during that movement phase, keeping in mind that its movement phase ends as soon as another unit moves. A unit using assault movement which breaks is no longer using assault movement and is subject to the -1 first fire non-assault movement dice roll modifier for the remainder of its movement phase. So I guess that's just simulating like the attacking unit is, those guys are panicking and they're just like running, maybe like running back to where they started from, and so they're not being careful about taking cover. If they're pinned, then they've got their heads down, and they're not like running. They're not routing. Whereas if they're broken, they're routing and are presumably going to run away. So they present larger targets. When a unit is attacked by defensive first fire, or subsequent first fire, or final protective fire, the location in which the attack is resolved is marked with a residual firepower counter equal to half, up to a maximum of 12, rounding fractions down, of the infantry fire table firepower column used for that attack. Although a support weapon that malfunctions or chooses to retain rate of fire leaves no residual firepower. After the amount of residual firepower left by any attack has been determined, it is reduced by 1 infantry fire table column for each positive infantry fire table dice roll modifier caused solely by conditions outside the target hex. This could include positive leadership modifiers, counter-exhausted status, and line-of-sight hindrances. Negative leadership modifiers never affect residual firepower. Thereafter, any unit entering or expending movement factors in that same location in the same movement phase is attacked on the infantry fire table with the firepower represented by that counter by a new infantry fire table dice roll. What is it? TEM, which is that terrain effects modifier? Yeah, the terrain effects modifier / smoke of the target location, and any applicable first fire non-assault movement or first fire movement in open ground apply as a dice roll modifier. A unit expending movement factors to leave a location is not subject to residual firepower attack in the location it is leaving. Residual firepower can never form a fire group. It must always attack alone. Residual firepower is always the first defensive first fire attack allowed against a moving unit in its current location during its movement phase, and is resolved before the defender has to declare an attack. No more than 1 residual firepower counter can be placed in a location, but a larger residual firepower counter, subsequently earned from a larger qualifying infantry fire table attack, will replace a smaller residual firepower counter. Thus, residual firepower counters from different qualifying attacks are not combined. A unit can ordinarily be attacked by residual firepower only once per location. Movement factors expended simultaneously, for example, 2 movement factors to enter a building, do not cause multiple residual firepower attacks. A unit can be attacked by residual firepower again in the same location if the unit expends additional movement factors in that location, and by so doing, the unit is subject to more negative DRM dice roll modifiers or less positive dice roll modifiers. Okay. Interesting. I would want to see an example of that. Remove all residual firepower counters at the end of the movement phase. Defensive fire phase. That portion of defensive fire that occurs strictly during the defensive fire phase is called final fire. During final fire, any of the defender's units or machine guns that are not marked with a first or final fire counter may fire, including machine guns that maintained rate of fire in the movement phase. Any of the defender's units or machine guns that are marked with a first fire counter may also fire again, but only at units in an adjacent hex, and they must then flip the first fire counter to its final fire side. A unit marked with first fire has its and its machine gun firepower halved and doubled due to the effect of point-blank fire. A unit already marked with final fire cannot fire during final fire. Final fire attacks affect all enemy units in a target location, not just those that have moved. But first fire non-assault movement and first fire movement in open ground do not apply. Leader direction used during defensive first fire can be used again in subsequent first fire, final protective fire, or final fire, but only for one firing unit or fire group. And that unit or fire group cannot include different firers than those he directed during first fire. If forming a new fire group during that player turn, the leader cannot direct its fire, even during final protective fire. Remove all first and final fire counters at the end of the defensive fire phase. So on the 2 pages earlier, there's a summary of how defensive fire works. So you've got defensive first fire, which occurs during the opponent's movement phase. It affects only moving units. It can leave residual firepower, and when you do it, you place a first fire counter on the firing units. Then you've got subsequent first fire, which is at half firepower. This also occurs during the opponent's movement phase. It affects only moving units within normal range. It can leave residual firepower. It is available to units that have already been marked with the first fire counter, but have no closer target. Okay. You flip the counter to its final fire side. This lowers the breakdown number of machine guns by 2, with removal on an infantry fire table dice roll greater than or equal to the original breakdown number. Then you've got final protective fire. Final protective fire, which is at half firepower. This occurs during the opponent's movement phase. It affects only adjacent moving units. It can leave residual firepower. It's available to units that are already marked with a final fire counter and acts as a normal morale check against firing and directing units. It lowers the breakdown number of machine guns by 2, with removal of the machine gun on an infantry fire table dice roll greater than or equal to the original breakdown number. And then finally you have final fire, which occurs during the defensive fire phase. First fire non-assault movement and first fire movement in open ground DRMs do not apply. It affects all units in the target location. It's available to units already marked with a first fire counter only if they are firing at an adjacent hex, which affects machine guns, as explained in 1A above, and it's at half firepower. And you place or flip to the final fire counter. Okay. So we've got a movement phase example in figure 1. So in the Russian movement phase, the 447 in Z, what is it? ZI5? Oh, that was map Z hex I5, so that's here. Spends 2 movement factors to enter J5 here. Okay, so it's the brown counter. Because this is a move of only 1 hex that does not require all of the 447's movement factor allotment, it may assault move. The 447 in H3 here, I guess that unit, it starts here. The 447 in H3 spends 2 movement factors to enter I3 here, and another 2 movement factors to enter J2. Because the light machine gun's portage points do not exceed the squad's inherent portage capacity, so the portage points are 1, and the inherent portage capacity of the squad is 3, the light machine gun does not affect movement. Because the portage points does not exceed the inherent portage capacity, the light machine gun does not affect movement. Got it. Okay. So, next. The 527 in F3. 527 in F3, yep. Declares double time and spends 1 movement factor to enter G3. Okay. 1 movement factor to enter H2. 2 movement factors to enter I3. And then 2 movement factors to enter J3 for a total of 6 movement factors, ending in a counter exhausted, ending with the counter exhausted. So you add a CX marker. Oh, okay, so the 527 is this brown 527. Got it. The 9-1 and 447 in F4, 9-1 and 447 that started in F4, move together and spend 2 movement factors to enter G4, then H4, then I4, for a total of 6 movement factors using the leader bonus. Okay. The 8-1 and 447 in E3 is here. So I guess it's this unit started there. The 8-1 and 447 in E3 declare double time and spend 2 movement factors to enter E4, then E5, then F5, then G5 for a total of 8 movement factors, ending with the counter exhausted status. Got it. Movement phase and defensive fire phase example. The 447 with a medium machine gun in ZI4 is here. The 447 with a medium machine gun in ZI4 spends 2 movement factors to enter J3. Because the 5 Portage Point medium machine gun. Oh, those are the Portage Points. So this number 1 is not the Portage Points. It's this number 1 there. That's the Portage Points for the light machine gun. Got it. The 5 Portage Points medium machine gun reduces the squad's movement factors by 2. Because it does this, the squad cannot assault move to J3. The 447 could declare double time, which would increase its movement factors by 2, but reduce its inherent portage capacity by 1 for a net of 1 extra movement factor, allowing it to enter K3 after J3. Assume this is the move the Russian player makes. The German 467 with a medium machine gun in K5 here, fires only the 467 at the moving unit in J3 as it enters J3 on the 4 firepower column with a +2 DRM. So because it's a +2 DRM because it's +3 for the stone building, which is in the defender's favor, but -1 for the first fire non-assault movement DRM. The firing unit does not cower because it does not roll doubles. It leaves 2 residual firepower in hex J3, and the squad only is marked with a first fire counter. When the Russian 447 continues moving into K3, the German player then fires the K5 medium machine gun on the 4 firepower column with a -2 net DRM, -1 for first fire movement in open ground, and -1 for first fire non-assault movement. Assuming the medium machine gun neither malfunctions, cowers, nor retains rate of fire, that is, the original dice roll is neither 12 nor doubles, and the colored die is 3 or more, the medium machine gun is marked with the first fire counter, using the same marker covering the 467 to cover the whole German stack, and leaves 2 residual firepower in hex K3. Now the Russian player moves on to the next unit, the 527 in hex G5. G5 here, G5, and I guess they're referring to that counter there. So the Russian player moves on to the next unit, the 527 in hex G5, with the intention of using 4 movement factors to get to K4. K4 is there. Note, the road bonus would not apply as the entire move isn't across road hex sides, because this part of the movement is not across a road hex. Got it. The 527 enters H5 and I5. At this point, the German player declares that he will subsequent first fire with the 467, already marked first fire, since the Russians are within normal range and no known enemy unit is closer. The squad also uses the medium machine gun, although its breakdown number will be lowered by 2, because the medium machine gun will be marked with a final fire counter regardless of whether or not it fires. The 9 firepower of the 467 and medium machine gun is halved, and they attack on the 4 firepower column with a -2 net DRM, -1 for first fire non-assault movement, and -1 first fire movement in open ground. The attack will leave 2 residual firepower unless the shot cowers or the medium machine gun malfunctions, in which case it leaves 1 residual firepower. Or it cowers and the medium machine gun malfunctions, in which case it leaves 0 residual firepower. Assume the 527 breaks and 2 residual firepower are left in the hex. Flip the first fire counter on the German stack to a final fire counter. The Russian player then moves the 447 in hex F6. F6. It moves to G6, H5, and I5, where it undergoes a 2 residual firepower attack with a -2 net DRM, -1 for first fire in movement in open ground, and -1 for first fire non-assault movement. Assume this attack has no effect. The German player would like to shoot again with the units in K5. But under a final fire marker, they can only fire at adjacent units. The 447 continues to move to I6 for 4 movement factors, and uses the road bonus to move to I7. The Russian 9-2 and 447 with medium machine gun in hex F5, F5 here, moves to G6 here, H5 here, I6 here, and J5 here for 5 movement factors. The leader's 1 inherent portage capacity is added to the multi-man counter's 3 inherent portage capacity for a total of 4 inherent portage capacity, which is subtracted from the medium machine gun's 5 portage points. The difference is subtracted from the 6 movement factors provided by the leader bonus. Upon entering J5, the German player declares final protective fire. The fire group's firepower, the medium machine gun must attack with the 467, is halved due to subsequent first fire, and doubled due to point-blank fire, and attacks on the 8 firepower column with a +2 net DRM, +3 for the stone building, -1 for first fire non-assault movement. On an original dice roll of 7, the 467 passes its final protective fire normal morale check by the highest possible amount. So it pins, and the Russians must take a pin test check. Right? PTC. Pin task check. A 9 on the 8 firepower column, with the attack leaving 4 residual firepower. Finally, the Russian 426 in H6 here moves I6 here, J6 here, and K6 here, where the German player again declares final protective fire. The fire group's firepower is halved due to subsequent first fire, halved again due to being pinned, and doubled due to point-blank fire, and attacks on the 4 firepower column with a -1 net DRM, -1 for first fire non-assault movement. The Germans' luck runs out, however, as they roll an original dice roll of a non-doubles 10, which means the 467 fails its final protective normal morale check by 3, becoming replaced by a 447 second line unit if the German experience level rating, right? That's that what that stands for? ELR? It's not in the glossary. Oh god. ELR. I think that stands for experience. Let me check. Let me check. Okay, yeah, so I found it. It's not defined in the glossary. It's defined on here in section 5.1. So that's an oversight on their part. They should have that in the glossary. But anyway, so they roll an original dice roll of a non-doubles 10, which means the 467, this guy, fails its final protective normal morale check by 3, becoming replaced by a 447 second line unit if the German experience level rating is 2 or less, and is flipped to its broken side and marked with a desperation morale counter, right? That's what DM stands for, I think. Yeah. Additionally, the medium machine gun, this one, malfunctions and is flipped to its malfunctioned side. The shot still occurs, however, but results in no effect, as the final result is a 9 on the 4 firepower column. A 1 residual firepower marker is placed, I guess in this hex. The medium machine gun malfunctions, so it leaves no residual firepower. Figure 2 shows the result after all results except the final protective fire attack against the 426, this guy, moving into hex K6, this one. Right, so it doesn't show the 1 residual firepower here, or the flipped units, or the desperation morale marker. Got it. Advancing fire phase. The attacker's units and machine guns that did not fire in the prep fire phase may fire at half firepower. A squad with an underlined firepower factor may use assault fire. Assault fire capability allows any squad using its own firepower during the assault advancing fire phase to add 1 firepower to its attack after all modification to the squad's own firepower. Any fraction is then rounded up. The assault fire bonus is not applicable to any fire beyond a unit's normal range. Okay. Neither medium machine guns nor heavy machine guns that have moved in the current movement phase may fire in the advancing fire phase. Remove all prep fire counters at the end of the advancing fire phase. Rout phase. During the rout phase, a broken unit not in melee may not end a rout phase adjacent to or in the same location as an unbroken known enemy unit, and may not remain in the same open ground location in the normal range and line of sight of a known good order enemy unit that would be able to interdict it if it were routing in that hex. See below. Such a unit is placed under a desperation morale counter and if not in melee, must rout away, attacker first, one unit at a time, during that rout phase, or be eliminated for failure to rout. All broken units, except wounded single-man counters, have 6 movement factors for use in the rout phase. This amount can never be increased. A broken unit may rout into an open ground hex in the line of sight and normal range of a known enemy unit without interdiction. See below. It may do that only if it has used low crawl, but it still may not be adjacent to an unbroken known enemy unit at the end of the rout phase, or it will be eliminated for failure to rout. Low crawl is a rout of 1 hex that requires the entire movement factor allotment of the routing unit. A routing unit using low crawl cannot be interdicted. All other rout provisions apply unchanged to low crawl. A routing unit must move to the nearest, in movement factors, building or woods hex within 6 movement factors. In so doing, a routing unit may not rout toward an enemy unit, even if it is unbroken, while in that enemy's line of sight, in any way which decreases the range in hexes between the routing unit and the known enemy unit. Nor may it move towards such a unit after leaving its line of sight during that rout phase. Nor, if adjacent to an enemy unit, may it move to another hex adjacent to that same enemy unit, unless in doing so it is leaving that enemy unit's location. Otherwise, a routing unit may move towards an enemy unit. Another hex adjacent to that same enemy unit unless it is leaving that enemy unit's location. I'm not sure what that means. Upon reaching the nearest legal woods or building hex not adjacent to an enemy unit, a routing unit must stop and end its rout phase in that building or woods hex unless the unit can immediately enter another building or woods hex. A broken unit may always rout out of a building in which it begins its rout phase. A routing unit must ignore any building or woods hex that it cannot enter due to stacking limits, and may also ignore a building or woods hex if that hex is no further away from a known enemy unit than its starting hex. Okay. If no building or woods can be reached during that rout phase, a broken unit may rout to any hex consistent with the above restrictions. A broken unit may rout only if under desperation morale. An unpinned leader already stacked with a broken unit before it routs may elect to rout with the broken unit, even though he is not broken. If the leader does so, he is eliminated if the broken unit he is stacked with fails an interdiction morale check. He must remain with the unit throughout the rout phase, but is not considered broken, and may add his leadership dice roll modifier to its interdiction normal morale check. Interdiction occurs whenever a routing unit enters an open ground hex without using low crawl, while in the normal range and line of sight of an unbroken, unpinned enemy unit capable of firing on it in that hex with at least 1 firepower. A unit in melee cannot interdict, nor can a unit or support weapon which has any form of halved firepower or positive DRM, for example, a counter-exhausted unit or a lone leader with a machine gun. If interdiction occurs, then the routing unit is subject to a normal morale check and everything that normally entails. A routing unit that fails its interdiction, normal morale check, suffers casualty reduction, although any remaining half squad may continue to rout thereafter. Interdiction does not affect other units in the hex, and units are capable of interdiction even if they have exhausted all other fire options for that player turn. An interdicted unit that suffers a pin result on its normal morale check may not rout further that turn, and if still adjacent to a known enemy unit, is eliminated for failure to rout. A broken unit may not be interdicted more than once per open ground hex entered, regardless of the number of enemy units that can claim interdiction. An open ground hex for purposes of interdiction is any open ground hex that any interdictor could apply during a hypothetical defensive first fire opportunity, the -1 first fire movement in open ground DRM. The first fire movement in open ground DRM is negated if there is a hindrance between the routing unit and the interdictor. Note that first fire does not actually occur during the rout phase. Okay, let's look at these examples. So the rout phase summary. The routing unit may use 6 movement factors. Wounded single-man counters only have 3 movement factors. It must rout if adjacent to an unbroken enemy unit. It must rout from its starting hex if a hypothetical unit routing through that hex would be subject to interdiction. It may rout only if under a desperation morale counter. When routing, it must rout towards the nearest building or woods that is not closer to a known enemy unit. The routing unit may ignore any building hex that is part of a building it is already in. Interdiction can occur if routing in open ground, normal range, and unhindered line of sight of an enemy unit without using low crawl. Low crawl is a rout of 1 hex, consistent with above rules that protects against interdiction. Units that must rout but cannot are eliminated. If a woods or building hex cannot be reached in a single rout phase, that is, it's more than 6 movement factors away, a unit may rout to any terrain consistent with all other requirements. A routing unit possessing a support weapon must carry as close to its inherent portage capacity as it can without exceeding it. A support weapon exceeding the portage point allowance is dropped before a unit routs. Now, if we look at this example, rout phase example, it is the rout phase, and each of the broken units is under desperation morale and therefore eligible to rout. The ZM9 unit, M9 here, may opt to remain stationary or route to the woods in N9, and then possibly to O10 or N10. It cannot route to L8 or M8, as doing so would take it closer to a known enemy unit. It could ignore the woods in N9, which are no farther from O6, than M9 is. It could ignore the woods in N9, which is no farther from O6 than M9 is, and route instead to N10, this one, or L10 here. Okay, so I think what they're saying is that this guy could route into this hex and then into L10, or into this hex and then into N10 without passing through that hex if it wanted to. The N7 unit must route. It cannot stay in open ground within normal range of the possible interdictors in O6, M6, or L7, and would automatically become desperation morale at the start of the route phase. It can route to O8, or it can ignore O8, which is no farther from O6 than N7 is, and route towards N9 here, or M9, either low crawling to N8 or suffering interdiction therein on the way to N9 or M9. The N6 unit here, must route to N7. It can low crawl safely, or it can suffer interdiction in N7 and continue routing to O8. If the 467 in M6 here, were in M5 instead here, the N6 unit, this one, could route to M7 here, but could not stay there, and would then have to suffer interdiction on its way to O8 here. The N6 could go here, where it would have to stop. Okay. So I guess interdiction from this guy. So I think that what it's saying is, if this one was here, this guy could route away from this guy into here and then continue routing to O8, because I guess it would still be adjacent to that one. The N5 unit here is eliminated for failure to route, and would be even if the 467 were in M5 instead of M6. So I think the idea is that this guy can't route anywhere can't end up anywhere other than in adjacent to an enemy unit, something like that. Although I don't know why. I guess even by, and I think the idea is that he can't enter a hex which is not adjacent to an enemy unit, something like that. Advance phase. The attacker may transfer support weapons between good order unpinned units and move any of his good order unpinned infantry units to an adjacent hex, even if enemy infantry units occupy the hex moved into. A unit advancing into a hex that requires all its movement factors must become counter-exhausted. For example, a Russian squad carrying a 5 portage point medium machine gun has only 2 movement factors, and therefore must become counter-exhausted to advance into a hex requiring 2 movement factors to enter during the movement phase, woods or building, unless it is accompanied by a leader who adds 2 movement factors and 1 inherent portage capacity to the squad, thereby leaving it with 5 movement factors. A counter-exhausted unit may not advance into a hex that would cost all its movement factors to enter. For example, a counter-exhausted German squad possessing a 4 portage point heavy machine gun would have only 2 movement factors left after deducting for 2 excess portage points. Its inherent portage capacity is reduced to 2 due to being counter-exhausted, and cannot advance into a building hex unless it is accompanied by a leader. Place a close combat counter on units that advance into an enemy-occupied hex. Close combat phase. Close combat is a type of attack that occurs during the close combat phase between opposing units in the same hex. There are no terrain effects modifications to a close combat attack dice roll, and neither support weapons nor point-blank fire apply. Unlike fire attacks, close combat is considered simultaneous, unless an ambush occurs, so both sides attack the other, even if one or both is thereby eliminated. The attacker specifies the order in which multiple hexes containing close combat situations are to be resolved. Each hex's close combat for that turn must be completely resolved before resolving close combat in another hex. Each side must designate all of its attacks in that hex prior to the resolution of any of them, attacker designating his first. The defender then designates all of his attacks, after which the attacker resolves all of his previously declared attacks. The defender then resolves all of his attacks, even if those units have been eliminated or reduced. Units may attack any unit or combination of units in the same hex, so long as no unit attacks or is attacked more than once per close combat phase. All units in the hex do not have to be attacked, nor do all units have to make an attack. Only unbroken units may attack, but even broken units defend, although they suffer a -2 DRM to close combat attacks against them. The firepower of attacking units is compared to the firepower of those enemy units being attacked in order to achieve a ratio of attack to defense firepower strength called odds. Once odds have been determined, a dice roll is made for each attack. If the final dice roll is less than the kill number listed on the close combat table under the applicable odds column, the attacked units are eliminated. A final dice roll that equals the kill number listed on the close combat table results in casualty reduction of one of the attacked units, randomly determined. A final dice roll greater than the kill number has no effect. Any single man counter in close combat has an attack and defense firepower strength of 1. A single man counter may attack alone, but if it does, it must also defend alone. Any number of single man counters may combine with multi-man counters or other single man counters to make a close combat attack by adding their firepower together. A single man counter defends in close combat as part of the group it attacks with by adding its 1 firepower to the firepower of the unit it is stacked on top of. Players are free to rearrange their stacks prior to the commencement of the close combat phase. A leader may direct the close combat of the multi-man counter it attacks and defends with, and any other units which join that multi-man counter in a combined close combat attack by applying his leadership dice roll modifier to modify the close combat dice roll, in addition to adding his firepower to the strength of the attack. A leader may not use his leadership dice roll modifier to modify an attack he makes alone. Whenever infantry advances into close combat in a woods or building hex, unless reinforcing a melee, an ambush can conceivably occur. Prior to declaring close combat attacks in such a case, each player makes one die roll. If either player rolls at least 3 less than the other, he has succeeded in ambushing his opponent. The side that has the ambush status in a close combat is entitled to a -1 dice roll modifier to its close combat attacks, and a +1 dice roll modifier to close combat attacks against it, until that close combat becomes a melee at the end of the close combat phase. Ambush die rolls are subject to die roll modifiers, even if only a portion of a player's close combat force is qualified to use it. Die roll modifiers include +1 for being counter-exhausted, +1 for being pinned, +1 for being inexperienced, and any one leadership die roll modifier, unless the leader is alone. The ambushing side resolves all of its attacks in that close combat phase first. Only surviving enemy units may attack back after being ambushed. If infantry from both sides, any of which is unbroken, remain in the same location after all initial close combat attacks have been resolved at the end of the close combat phase, they are considered to be locked in melee and may not conduct any activity other than close combat. For example, leave that location, make a fire attack, interdict routing units, etc. Place a melee counter on such a stack. New units may advance into a melee hex, but must engage in close combat. Non-melee units may attack the melee units during a fire phase, but all friendly and enemy units in the hex must be attacked. Remove the melee counter as soon as no unbroken unit remains. Remove all pin counters at the end of the close combat phase. Close combat phase example. All advances, shown by yellow arrows, have been completed. The close combats are resolved in the order chosen by the attacker, the Germans. When the German 467 in G6 advances into close combat with the Russian 426 in F5, ambush can occur because it is a building location. The ambush die roll modifier of the 426 is +1 conscript. It's +1 because they are a conscript unit, while the German die roll modifier is 0. No ambush occurs when the Russian die roll is a 3 and the German die roll is a 2. The German attacks at 1-to-1 odds, as does the Russian. The dice roll modifier for both attacks is 0. The German dice roll of 5 causes casualty reduction, but does not change the odds. The Russian dice roll of 9 has no effect. The Russian 426 is replaced with a 226, and the location is marked with a melee counter. The German 81, 91, and 467 in H5 advance into G5 with the Russian 447. Ambush is possible with a German die roll modifier of -1 for 1 leader's modifier and a Russian die roll modifier of 0. The German die roll is a 6, the Russian 3, so no ambush occurs. The 467 contributes 4 firepower factors, and each of the leaders contributes 1 firepower factor for odds of 6-4 or 3-2. The Russian must attack at 1-2 odds. Because the leaders are attacking with the squad, they cannot be attacked separately. The Germans have a -1 dice roll modifier for 1 leader's modifier, and the Russian dice roll modifier is 0. The German dice roll of 6 is modified to a 5 and eliminates the Russian 447. The Russian dice roll is a 3, and all of the Germans are eliminated as well. The hex is now empty, and no informational markers are placed. The 3 German 447s advance into the H4 building location with the 2 Russian 458s. Both sides have ambush die roll modifiers of 0, and their respective ambush die rolls of 3 for the Germans and 5 for the Russians result in no ambush. The German must declare all his attacks first. Each of his squads may only attack once, and each of the Russian squads may only be attacked once. The German options are 1 big attack of 12 to 8 for odds of 3 to 2, 2 squads on 1 Russian and 1 squad on the other 2 for 1 attack at 2 to 1. 2 squads on 1 Russian squad and 1 German squad on another Russian squad for 1 attack at 2 to 1 and 1 attack at 1 to 1, or all 3 squads on 1 of the Russian squads. This is 1 attack of 3 to 1 without an attack on the second Russian squad. Okay, got it. The German announces 2 attacks, 1 at 2 to 1 and 1 at 1 to 1. The Russian must now announce attacks. The options are 1 big attack of 8 to 12 at an odds of ratio of 1 to 2. 1 458 squad attacks 2 447s, so being on the 1 to 2 column, and the other 458 attacks the third 447 on the 1 to 1 column. Or the 2 458s attack 2 447s as 1 1 to 1 attack, while the third 447 is not attacked. Each 458 attacks 1 447 for 2 1 to 1 attacks, while the third 447 is not attacked, or both 458s attack 1 447 at on the 2 to 1 column, while the other 2 447 squads are not attacked. So those are all different options for what the Russian player could do. Got it. The Russian player announces 2 attacks. 1 458 squad attacks 2 447 squads on the 1 to 2 odds column, and the other 458 squad attacks the remaining 447 squad. All the attacks have 0 dice roll modifiers. The German player rolls a 6 on his 2 to 1 attack, eliminating the squad, and rolls a 9 on the 1 to 1 attack for no result. The Russians roll a 4 on the 1 to 2 column attack to produce a casualty reduction, and a 7 on the 1 to 1 attack for no result. Randomly determine which of the German 447s suffers the casualty reduction. After the attacks, the location contains 2 German 447 squads, 1 German 237 half squad, and 1 Russian 458 squad, all marked with a melee counter. In J3, here, the German 467 squad is in melee with the Russian 447 and 527 squads from the previous turn, and the wounded German 9-2 leader in K4 advances in to reinforce the melee. There is no ambush possibility since melee already exists. The German declares a 1-to-1 attack against the 527 squad. The 447 Russian squad is not being attacked. The Russian attacks at 3-to-2 odds against both the squad and the leader. The German attack has a DRM of -1. Leadership 1 less than normal due to the wound. The Russian attack dice roll modifier is 0. The German close combat dice roll is 7, as is the Russian close combat dice roll. Both result in no effect, and the melee continues. The German 467 advances into the I-4 building location here with the Russian 447 squad. Ambush is possible. The die roll modifiers are 0 for both sides. The German die roll is 4 and the Russian die roll is 1, which results in the Russians ambushing the Germans. Close combat in this location is now sequential. The Russian will declare and resolve his attacks. The German will declare and resolve attacks with his survivors. The Russians declare a 1-to-1 odds attack. The dice roll modifier is -1 because it's an ambush. The dice roll of 6 results in a casualty reduction result against the German squad, and the 467 squad is replaced by a 247. The Germans now declare a 1-to-2 odds attack. The dice roll modifier is +1 because they're being ambushed. The dice roll of 5 results in no effect. The location is marked with a melee counter. The melee will continue next player turn, but the close combat dice roll modifier caused by the ambush will no longer be applicable. The counter-exhausted German 548 advances into E6 here with the Russian 447 squad. There is no possibility of ambush. The German attacks at 1-to-1 odds with a +1 dice roll modifier, and the Russian attacks at 1-to-2 odds with a -1 dice roll modifier, with the dice roll modifier due to the 458 being counter-exhausted. The German dice roll is a 9, and the Russian dice roll is a 2, invoking the possibility of field promotion, Rule 5.3. The Russian makes a die roll on the leader creation table with a +1 DRM. His original die roll of 1 is modified to 2, creating an 8-0 Russian leader. The close combat odds are then recalculated. The German attack remains at 1-to-1 odds with no effect. The Russian attack changes to 1-to-1 odds, although the close combat dice roll of 2 kills the 548 squad at either 1-to-2 odds or 1-to-1 odds. Wow, okay, so this is quite involved, quite complicated. Turn record chart. The previous defender now becomes the attacker and inverts the counter being used to track the turn, and if he was already the attacker, this game turn advances the turn counter 1 box on the turn record chart. When the turn counter is placed on the end box, the scenario is over. If a turn box is halved diagonally and printed in red, it indicates that only the first side to move has a player turn that final game turn. Nationality symbols in a turn box are reminders to check for reinforcements that game turn. To keep track of turns, use a multi-man counter from a nationality not in play. Use the unbroken side for the side that moves first, and flip to the broken side for the side that moves second. Support weapons. A unit can possess any number of support weapons. A support weapon may not move by itself. It must be carried by a unit at some cost in portage points. An unbroken unit may pick up and drop support weapons at any point in its move, provided it has sufficient movement factors to do so, although no support weapon can be portaged more than once per movement phase. An unbroken unit may drop possession of a support weapon at no movement factor cost during its movement phase or advance phase. If a unit drops possession of a support weapon at the start of an allowed phase prior to expending movement factors, that support weapon is assumed to have been unpossessed and hence not portaged by any unit at the start of that phase. Units must drop support weapons in excess of their inherent portage capacity before they can route. If a unit drops possession or is eliminated, its support weapon is left unattended in the same location and must be recovered to be possessed. Good order infantry may claim possession of an unpossessed support weapon in their hex at the start of their reinforcement phase. What's our rally phase? At the start of their rally phase. Good order infantry may claim possession of an unpossessed support weapon in their hex at the start of their rally phase as their sole action during that rally phase, provided they make a recovery die roll of less than 6, with a +1 die roll modifier if counter-exhausted. If they are counter-exhausted. A support weapon cannot be transferred during the same phase it is recovered. Moving infantry may also make a recovery attempt at a cost of 1 movement factor. Portage is assessed per item carried against the inherent portage capacity of a multi-man counter or single-man counter. A multi-man counter has an inherent portage capacity of 3 portage points, and a single-man counter has an inherent portage capacity of 1 portage point. An infantry unit loses 1 movement factor for each portage point carried in excess of its inherent portage capacity, and a single-man counter may never carry more than 2 portage points. 1 good order single-man counter may add its inherent portage capacity to that of 1 good order multi-man counter to increase the multi-man counter's inherent portage capacity by 1 if they start the movement phase together and move as a stack. Support weapons may be voluntarily destroyed by their possessing unit during the prep fire phase or defensive fire phase, but such an action counts as use of a support weapon. Support weapons may also be destroyed when a final infantry fire table dice roll results in a KIA of the possessing unit. Make a subsequent die roll on the same column as the infantry fire table attack for each support weapon possessed by that unit. If the die roll is a KIA, that support weapon is destroyed. If it is a K, then that support weapon is malfunctioned. What's K? A captured support weapon has its rate of fire lowered by 1 and its breakdown number or elimination number lowered by 2. Right? X is elimination number, I think. X is not elimination number. X is breakdown number of a support weapon. Weapon is not repairable. Okay. Okay, so it's they're both breakdown numbers, but they use the B letter when a weapon is repairable and the X number when it's not repairable. Okay. A captured support weapon has its rate of fire lowered by 1, and its breakdown number, or its B number or X number, lowered by 2. And a support weapon used by an inexperienced multi-man counter has its breakdown number lowered by 1. Both effects being cumulative with other penalties. A squad may fire any one support weapon at no cost to its own firepower. A squad may fire 2 support weapons, and a half squad may fire 1 support weapon, but it forfeits its own firepower for the current and any remaining fire phases in that player's turn, except for... what's SFF again? And it's not in the glossary. Oh, yeah, it is. Subsequent first fire. Subsequent first fire is firing again in the defensive first fire phase, but as area fire. Okay. Except for subsequent first fire, final protective fire, and final fire against an adjacent unit. Okay. The close combat phase is not considered a fire phase. A single man counter may use 1 support weapon, but he loses any leadership DRM he may have otherwise exerted but he loses any leadership DRM he may have otherwise exerted during that fire phase. Support weapons and guns may not set up unpossessed. Machine guns. Each machine gun has a 2-number hyphenated strength factor. The number on its left is its firepower, and the number on its right is its normal range, as measured in hexes. A single-man counter may fire 1 machine gun as area fire, while 2 single-man counters stacked together may fire any 1 machine gun at full firepower. Okay. If a squad is going to fire its own firepower and a machine gun at the same target, at both the same hex and at the same unit, during the same phase, they must form a fire group. They may not attack separately, unless the machine gun retains rate of fire, or the squad attacks in subsequent first fire without using the machine gun. Machine gun fire is limited to a 16-hex maximum range, unless directed by a leader. Such attacks at a range greater than 16 hexes are halved as area fire versus unbroken infantry, in addition to the effects of firing at long range. A machine gun with no breakdown number shown on the counter has an inherent breakdown number of 12. If the original infantry fire table dice roll of any attack using a machine gun is greater than or equal to its breakdown number, 1 machine gun is malfunctioned and flipped over after making its attack. Randomly select which machine gun malfunctions if using multiple machine guns in a fire group. The breakdown number of a machine gun using subsequent first fire or final fire when marked with a first fire counter is lowered by 2, and 1 machine gun is removed if the original infantry fire table dice roll is greater than or equal to the original breakdown number. Flamethrowers. A flamethrower is a support weapon with a normal range of 1 hex and a firepower factor of 24. A pinned unit cannot fire a flamethrower. A flamethrower may attack at long range 2 hexes at half firepower. Flamethrower firepower is never increased for point-blank fire. Flamethrower firepower is not halved during the advancing fire phase, but is affected by cowering. Flamethrower attacks are resolved on the infantry fire table, but receive no dice roll modifier for leadership or terrain effects modifiers. Applicable dice roll modifiers for hindrances, including smoke, and the +1 dice roll modifier for counter-exhaustion may apply. A unit may not use 2 flamethrowers, but a full squad may make a separate attack with its own firepower. A flamethrower may not combine with any other attack, nor may it form a fire group. Any unit possessing a flamethrower must deduct 1 per flamethrower possessed from the infantry fire table resolution dice roll of any attack against it. If the original infantry fire table resolution dice roll of any attack made by a flamethrower is greater than or equal to 10, its breakdown number, the flamethrower is removed from play after making its attack. Non-elite multi-man counters that use the flamethrower lower its breakdown number by 2. Demolition charges. A demolition charge is a support weapon that attacks in the target location in the advancing fire phase with 30 firepower factors on the infantry fire table. It is not subject to firepower modification due to point-blank fire or advancing fire phase use. The Defender's terrain effects modifier does apply to the resolution of the attack, as does the counter-exhaustion status of the placing unit, but leadership does not. A squad may not use 2 demolition charges, but a squad attacking with a demolition charge may use its own firepower in the advancing fire phase. Non-elite multi-man counters using a demolition charge lower its breakdown number by 2. An infantry unit possessing a demolition charge attempts to place it on an adjacent target during its movement phase by expending extra movement factors in the hex the demolition charge is placed from, equal to the number of movement factors it would require that unit to enter that target location were it to do so in that movement phase. The act of placing the demolition charge is considered movement in the location occupied by the placing unit, not in the location in which the demolition charge is actually placed. A unit may not place a demolition charge if it prep-fired or was pinned or broken prior to completing the placement attempt. Should the placing unit survive, unbroken and unpinned, all resultant defensive first fire, subsequent first fire, and final protective fire, then the demolition charge is operably placed. If the placing unit was counter-exhausted, the counter-exhausted +1 dice roll modifier is applied to the demolition charge attack resolution dice roll. A demolition charge that is operably placed during the movement phase attacks in the advancing fire phase on any original infantry fire table dice roll less than 12. Its breakdown number, 10 for non-elite use, and is removed from play. Okay. So it's a one-time thing. It's a one-use thing. Got it. Experience level rating and unit distinctions. Experience level rating. Each force in each scenario will be given a specific number of leaders, support weapons, and elite first line, second line, green, or conscript squads or half squads. However, during the course of play, leaders and multi-man counters are subject to possible replacement by poor quality units. Each order of battle will list an experience level rating for that group of units. This number represents the maximum amount by which an unbroken unit may fail any morale check after modification without being replaced by a lower quality unit. Should a unit that cannot be replaced by a lower quality unit fail a morale check by more than its experience level rating, it suffers no additional penalty. If an unbroken unit fails a morale check by more than its experience level rating, it is immediately replaced by a broken unit of the same size but one step lower in quality as per the nationality chart on page 12. Multi-man counters with underlined morale are not subject to experience level rating. Nationality distinctions. Units of different nationalities have different capabilities. In this game, these distinctions are reflected in the multi-man counters. Each major nationality and its units and support weapons are indicated by a common color distinct from those of other nations. Field promotions. Whenever a multi-man counter rolls an original 2 dice roll as the first self-rally attempt of a rally phase or in a close combat attack, it may create a leader. The quality of the leader is based on a die roll on the leader creation table, using the morale level of the unit at the time of the original 2 dice roll. If more than one type of multi-man counter made the close combat attack, use the best one to base the die roll on. Inexperienced multi-man counters. Green multi-man counters not stacked with a good order leader and all conscript multi-man counters suffer inexperienced penalties. They have 3 movement factors, not 4. They cower 2 columns, not 1. The breakdown number of a support weapon they use is lowered by 1. They suffer a +1 ambush die roll modifier. Captured equipment. Any support weapon that has been recovered by an enemy unit may be used by its new owner subject to certain penalties. Its rate of fire is reduced by 1, and the breakdown number is decreased by 2. And there we go. That's the end of the rules. This is just examples of the different counters. Yeah, and credits.